Once upon a time, there was an extremely rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. His daughters were very pretty, but everyone admired the youngest one so much that they called her simply Beauty. Fairy tales are lessons. Whether those lessons are for adults or children, and given in sincerity or humour, depend on the story and at which moment of its evolution we read it. Of the fairy tale we look at today, G.K. Chesterton said that its great lesson is that a thing must be loved before it is lovable. The fairy tale is, of course, Beauty and the Beast, one of the most popular and also one of the oldest fairy tales in the world. In 2016, researchers from the universities of Durham and Lisbon posited that Beauty and the Beast may stretch back as far as 4,000 years, based on the evolution of languages across Europe and Asia, dating back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans of the Neolithic Age. The first written record of a Beauty and the Beast-esque story comes 2,000 years later, in the 2nd century Roman novel The Golden Ass by Apuleius, which in turn is likely an adaptation of an earlier Greek novel by Lucius of Patrae. The Golden Ass is the story of a man named Lucius, who is accidentally transformed into a donkey and is forced to endure a long and painful journey in his bid to return to his human form. Throughout the novel, several stories are told, mostly about love and betrayal, of which Eros and Psyche, or Cupid and Psyche in the Roman version, is one. The story goes thus. Psyche is a beautiful princess, so beautiful that she is constantly compared to, and eventually worshipped instead of, the goddess of beauty and love, Aphrodite. Aphrodite, prone to fits of jealousy and rage, sends her son Eros to make her fall in love with a monster. However, when Eros sees her, he instead falls in love with her. Meanwhile, Psyche visits an oracle to find out if she will ever marry, and is told that she will marry a hideous beast. She is taken to a cliff where the west wind Zephyr brings her to her new home, a beautiful palace, where she lives with her new husband, who is invisible. She is happy for a while, with every need and want catered for. However, her sisters visit, and are jealous of her palatial life. So, they convince her that her invisible husband is in fact a monster that will kill her, and so she should find out what he looks like and kill him first. She agrees, and one night she takes a lantern and a knife to his bed. However, when she looks upon his sleeping form, she finds not a monster, but the beautiful god Eros. Unfortunately, a drop of oil from the lantern falls on him, waking him up. Betrayed, Eros flees, leaving Psyche alone. Aphrodite then tells her the only way to regain her husband is to complete several tasks, each more impossible than the last. Eventually, Eros forgives her, and uses ambrosia to turn her into a goddess. They marry as equals, and when their child is born, they called him Hedone, which means pleasure or joy. The Eros and Psyche story seems to be the foundation for several more tales, in particular those categorised by the N. Thompson Uther Guide, a classification guide for fairy tales, as type ATU 425, specifically 425A, B and C. A is the search for the lost husband, where a maiden goes on a quest to find her missing bridegroom, for example the Norwegian tale East of the Sun and West of the Moon. B is the disenchanted husband or witch's tasks, wherein a maiden must fulfill tasks to regain her husband. And ATU 425C is the animal groom, or Beauty and the Beast, wherein a maiden is promised to a beast. From Eros and Psyche we jump forward over 1,000 years to the year 1550, where Italian writer Giovanni Straparola published the first volume of his story collection, The Facetious Knights, which included The Pig King. Technically, the Pig King is ATU type 441, the Hog Bridegroom, the most famous example of which is Hans the Hedgehog. However, there are still enough similarities between these types of stories, both in setup, plot and lesson, that it is still worth mentioning. The key difference appears to be with the main character. Beauty and the Beast focuses on Beauty being forced to live with a beast, whereas the Hog Bridegroom focuses on an animal searching for a bride to accept him. The Pig King begins with a queen who has no child. While she sleeps one day, 3 fairies come upon her and each bestow 2 gifts. The first fairy says that the queen shall not be harmed by any man, and that she shall have a son with incomparable beauty. The second says that the queen shall never be offended, and that her son will have every virtue under the sun. The third, however, says that the queen will be very wise, but her son shall be born a pig and remain that way until he has married 3 times. These things come to pass, and the queen gives birth to a pig, whom she raises as a beloved son. One day the pig prince decides he should like to marry, specifically a poor girl from the village, and so the queen summons the girl and her mother and persuades them to agree to this union. The girl is disgusted by her bridegroom and plots to kill him, unaware that the prince has overheard. On their wedding night, the pig drives his hooves into her breast and kills her. Not long later, the pig prince decides he would like to marry again, and the queen persuades the poor woman to give up her second daughter. But the second daughter also plots to kill the pig, and so on their wedding night, the prince kills her too. Later, he decides to marry the third daughter. The third daughter agrees willingly to the union and treats the pig with compassion and affection instead of disgust, as her sisters had. The pig prince eventually reveals that beneath his pigskin he is a handsome youth, and when the young wife tells the king and queen and lets them see for themselves one night, they are overjoyed. The king abdicates, and the prince, who sheds his skin indefinitely, rules the land with his wife, known by all as King Pig. These were the days when fairy tales were not necessarily for children, although children would have heard fairy tales through the oral tradition. When they came to be written down, they were often done so to amuse an adult audience, as seen by the salon writers of 17th century France. One of these writers was Madame d'Aulnoy, who, in 1697, published several of her fairy tales in a book called Les Contes de Fées, which is where we get the term fairy tales, and a year later she published more in the book Contes Nouveaux ou les Fées à la mode, or, in English, New Tales or Fairies in Fashion. Among her stories are The Green Serpent, The Ram, and Prince Makassar. Prince Makassar is essentially an extended version of the Pig King. The Ram, however, begins similarly to King Lear, with a father asking questions of his daughters and mistaking the youngest's answers for words of vanity instead of love. Then, in a scene which would not be out of place in Snow White, the king drives the youngest daughter away and sends his captain out to kill her, and to bring her heart and tongue back as proof. The girl escapes after her servant, pet monkey, and pet dog sacrifice themselves to provide a tongue and heart to fool the king. She meets a gold-adorned ram in a fine castle, who tells her that he was once a prince, but was cursed by an ugly fairy because he had rejected her. The girl lives in splendour, but travels home for her first sister's wedding, so richly dressed that no one recognises her. When the second sister is to be married, the ram begs her not to leave, but she promises to stay no longer than before. However, her father locks her inside until she reveals her true identity. Everyone rejoices, but the girl loses track of time. The ram comes to find her, but is denied entry, and he dies of grief. The princess sees his dead body and is heartbroken. Finally, we have The Green Serpent, a story clearly inspired by Eros and Psyche, as Madame d'Aulnoy actually references it explicitly in the text. The tale begins in the same way as many versions of Sleeping Beauty, with the queen forgetting to invite a fairy to a party. The party is to celebrate the birth of twin princesses, named Belote and Ladronette. The evil fairy, Magotine, curses Ladronette with ugliness, but is stopped before she can similarly curse Belote. Ladronette, who grows up intelligent but lonely, isolates herself in a tower. One day she meets a serpent who takes an interest in her, but, afraid, she runs away. She is washed to sea, where she refuses the help of the green serpent swimming alongside the boat and nearly dies. She is saved and wakes up in a splendorous palace, owned by an invisible king. The king is, of course, the green serpent, but Ladronette doesn't yet realise. The serpent visits her at night when she can't see him, and she falls in love with his conversation. Eventually they marry. The serpent asks her to wait 7 years of marriage before he reveals himself to her, and she agrees, deciding she will not be like Psyche and not let her curiosity win out. However, she fails, and sneaks a look one night. Unfortunately, doing so results in the evil Magotine destroying the kingdom, casting the serpent to Hades, and taking Ladronette as a servant. Ladronette is then forced to complete various tasks, helped by a good fairy that the serpent sends. She also finds the waters of discernment. When she drinks it, she becomes wiser, and after splashing it on her face, her natural beauty is restored. The good fairy tells her to hide in a forest for several years, until the green serpent's imprisonment comes to an end. Then she returns to Magotine, who sends her to Hades to fetch the water of life, where she meets Proserpina, the Roman equivalent to Persephone. She is assisted by the personification of love, who restores the serpent to his human form, forces Magotine to end her spells, and sends them back to Ladronette's homeland. The first instance of a story being called Beauty and the Beast, or La Belle et la Bête, is from 1740, published in Le Jeune Américain et le Conte Marin, or The Young American and Marine Tales. It was written by French novelist Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. This version of Beauty and the Beast is long, more of a novella than a fairy tale, and many elements of it have been forgotten. perhaps due to the abridged version of the story written not long later in 1756 by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont and published in her Magasin d'Enfants. It is Beaumont's version, which was republished with a couple of Villeneuve's details by Andrew Lang in 1889 in his Blue Fairy book, that has become the most well-known telling of this tale, and the one most people are familiar with, that is, outside of the Disney films. Beaumont's version goes like this. A rich merchant has 3 sons and 3 daughters. One day his fortunes change, and he and his family are forced to move to the country, where they keep house for themselves and tend to animals and produce to live on. The elder daughters complain bitterly, but the youngest, known as Beauty, takes to her new life with good humour. One day the merchant hears one of his thought-to-be lost ships arrives at port, and so he leaves to find out if his fortune has been restored. The daughters, thinking they will soon be rich again, ask him for jewels and clothes, but Beauty asks for nothing. When prompted, she asks for a rose. The merchant travels to the port, but after sorting out his legal affairs, he is poorer than before. On the journey home, he is stuck in a snowstorm, but finds a beautiful castle in the forest where he takes shelter. The castle provides food and clothes for him, but as he is about to leave the next morning, he sees a rosebush and plucks a branch for Beauty. The beast emerges and admonishes him for stealing his flowers. When the merchant explains he had merely picked them for his daughter, the beast says he will only spare the merchant if one of his daughters comes to die in his place, or else the merchant must return in 3 months to face his punishment. The beast then sends him home with a chest of gold. The merchant plans to return himself to save his daughters, but Beauty insists, as it was her gift that had caused the predicament, she should go. She and her father set off for the beast's palace, where they say goodbye. Beauty finds a room marked Beauty's Room, and inside are plenty of things to keep her entertained. Thus she deduces that the beast doesn't wish to harm her. The beast visits her as she dines in the evening, where he shows himself to be kind and virtuous, if stupid. Every night the beast asks if Beauty will marry him, and every night she says no. One day she admits she misses her father, and has seen in the magical mirror that he is sick with grief. The beast allows her to go home for a week, and says to return to him, she must place her ring on the table and she will wake up again in the castle. Beauty goes to bed, and wakes up in her father's house. Her sisters have married and moved out, but when they hear she has returned they come back. The sisters are unhappy. They have both married, but their husbands cause them grief, one with his vanity, and the other with his haughty intelligence. When they see Beauty dressed like a princess, and hear of the wonderful life she leads in the castle, they decide to ply her with affection so that she'll stay home too long and the beast will eat her. 3 days after her deadline, Beauty dreams that the beast is dying, and guilt-ridden she decides to return to the castle. When she arrives, she passes the day in boredom until the evening, but the beast doesn't appear. She finds him in the same place she found him in her dream, by a canal. Thinking him to be dead, she throws herself on his body, but finds he is only unconscious, and so awakens him by splashing water on his face. She admits that although she didn't think she could love him, her torment at his near death had made her realise she cannot live without him. And though he is not handsome or witty, he is good-hearted and kind and more virtuous than any man, and that she will marry him. The beast is transformed into a beautiful youth, and when they go inside they find Beauty's family waiting in the hall. A fairy comes and congratulates Beauty for choosing virtue over handsomeness, but admonishes her sisters for their cruelty, and turns them into pillars of stone, as they shall remain until they have learnt to overcome the wickedness in their hearts. Villeneuve's version is very similar, and at first the only notable difference is that the merchant has 6 sons and 6 daughters, not 3 of each. When Beauty comes to the castle, Villeneuve describes all of the wonderful treasure she finds therein, and how she entertains herself day after day with theatre, operas, singing birds, and intelligent monkeys. Beauty also has several dreams about a woman who warns her not to be swayed by appearances, and a beautiful youth referred to as the Unknown. Beauty falls in love with the Unknown and wishes to save him when he reveals he is trapped. She finds portraits of him in the castle, and a bracelet with his likeness which she wears. She eventually grows anxious to see her father again, and finds the castle's many wonders no longer keep her entertained. She goes home with a promise to return in 2 months, after both the Beast and the Unknown despair about her departure. Her family have moved back to the city, where Beauty is antagonised by her sisters as their suitors fall in love with her instead. She also tells her father about the Beast's proposals, and he advises her to accept. Beauty misses the deadline, dreams about the Beast dying, and returns the next night. She revives the Beast in the garden, but doesn't decide to marry him. Instead, she dreams of the Unknown again, who tells her to follow the dictates of reason, and the lady who advises her to marry the Beast. Finally, she agrees to, and that evening she accepts his proposal. She dreams of the unknown and lady again, who congratulate her on making the right decision. The next morning she finds the unknown asleep next to her, but he will not awake. She realises that he is the beast and is overjoyed. And here is where the story deviates. Beaumont ends the version shortly after, but Villeneuve instead chooses to explain the beast's backstory in some detail. Two women arrive, a fairy and the beast's mother, who is a queen. Through various characters' accounts, the full story is told. It is a long and complex tale, involving fairies and hidden identities, but the bare bones of it are this. Beauty is not the daughter of a merchant, but actually the daughter of a king and fairy. Beauty was cursed to marry a monster, and her fairy mother imprisoned for breaking fairy laws, so the king presumed her dead. The merchant's real baby was dying, and so Beauty replaced it to hide her from an evil fairy who was trying to seduce the king, and thought removing his daughter would help her chances. This evil fairy was also an acquaintance of a queen, and often helped look after her son. After failing to seduce the king, the fairy turned her sights on the son. But the queen and son refused, because the marriage would be unequal and thus disastrous. Angered, the evil fairy transformed him into a beast, robbed him of his intelligence, and said the only way to resume his human form would be if a beautiful girl came to him willingly, expecting death, and loved him enough to marry him. She also forbade anyone to reveal the beast's true title, or the curse would be permanent. The sister of Beauty's mother, remembering that Beauty had been cursed to marry a monster, plans to help restore the beast. She let the merchant find the castle and ordered the beast to make his stay hospitable, because she knew her niece was in his care. She also knew that Beauty had asked for a rose, and so she orchestrated the first encounter. The beast was not really upset about the roses, but merely pretended to be, as an excuse to demand the merchant's daughter as recompense. The beast's short conversations and constant proposals were because he was frustrated the curse didn't allow him to speak with her properly, even though he had fallen madly in love. The fairy made him invisible during the day, so that he could see her enjoying the pleasures of the castle, and allowed him to visit her in her dreams in his human form as the unknown. The story ends with the fairy's imprisoned sister freeing herself to be reunited with her husband, and Beauty reunited with her true parents. The merchant, his sons, daughters and sons-in-law, for the daughters had married, arrive for the wedding, and all the kings and queens rule over their kingdoms with wisdom, kindness and compassion. In part 2, I'll explore the variations of this tale, and how it has continued to develop into the modern age.